Welcome back, my friends, to the Real News Network podcast. I'm your host, Mel Buer. I wanted to take a moment once again to thank you, our listeners, for joining us week after week. Without you, none of this would be possible. Whether you've got our shows on while you're making coffee in the morning, put our podcasts on during your commute to and from work, or give us a listen throughout the workday, the Real News Network is committed to bringing you ad-free, independent journalism that you can count on. We care a lot about what we do, and it's through donations from dedicated listeners like you that we can keep on doing it. Please consider becoming a monthly sustainer of the Real News Network by heading over to therealnews.com/donate. And if you want to stay in touch and get updates about our work, sign up for our free newsletter at therealnews.com/sign-up. As always, we appreciate your support in whatever form it takes. Now, over 50 million freelancers participate in the gig economy in the United States, and in 2023, it was projected to generate $455 billion. Many freelance workers work white-collar freelance contracts across a number of industries, most notably tech, media, and other creative industries. According to one survey, over 50% of gig workers reported to have experienced wage theft at least once in their freelance career. And due to the nature of contingent gig work, it can be difficult to compel employers to pay their freelancers once the project has been completed. Oftentimes, freelancers are left in a lurch after working for weeks or months on a contract and to find themselves unable to reach employers who owe them payment, sometimes to the tune of thousands of dollars. That's where Freelance Isn't Free comes in, legislation aimed at protecting freelancers from non-payment by unruly employers. First passed in New York City in 2017, Freelance Isn't Free legislation has helped freelancers recoup hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid invoices over the last 7 years. Now, backed by organizers at the National Writers Union and the Freelance Solidarity Project, local and state governments are looking to enact their own Freelance Isn't Free laws. With me today to discuss all this are Eric Thurm and Keisha Dutes. Keisha TK Dutes is an audio producer, an executive producer, educator, and on-air talent. With experience spanning terrestrial radio, online, and podcasts since 2005, her life in audio is all-encompassing. Her most recent offering on NPR Life Kit is about how to mind your business. And currently, she is helping people bring their podcasts to life via her company, Philo's Future Media. TK also serves as a board member for the Association of Independents in Radio. Eric is the campaigns coordinator at the National Writers Union and member organizer with the Freelance Solidarity Project, organizations that have advocated for Freelance Isn't Free legislation in places like New York State and Illinois. Welcome to the show, guys. Thanks so much for coming on this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
To start off our conversation today, I think it would be important for our listeners to get a better understanding of who and what Freelance Isn't Free legislation is for. Eric, can you give us a brief overview of what this legislation does for independent contractors or freelancers in places like New York State?
Yeah, absolutely. So Freelance Isn't Free, or the various Freelance Isn't Free laws that have been passed across the country, establish some very basic, much needed protections for freelancers and other independent contractors. That includes people who work in media, but it also includes, domestic workers, photographers, people, doing really all kinds of different freelance work. And the laws vary a little bit from place to place, but the sort of main tenets are: one, you have the right to have a written contract that lays out the terms of your work. 2, you can't be retaliated against for attempting to negotiate the terms of that work. And 3, maybe most importantly, you have to be paid on time for your work, generally speaking, within 30 days of completing the work. And then different states and cities have sort of different ways of going after employers for that. Often when I sort of say that stuff out loud, it sounds really like it should be lower than the baseline. And I think that it kind of is in some ways, but the nature of how freelancers are treated by or not treated by labor law is such that that's kind of where we're starting from.
Yeah, I mean, generally the nature of freelance media work is really interesting for our listeners who aren't really aware of how it works. Oftentimes it's per piece or per project. So what happens with freelance work is, say, for example, myself as a writer, as I was freelancing, just even 2 years ago, if I had an idea for a story, I could do a little bit of work on it, and then I could start pitching it to editors. And what that means is I would be sending essentially cold emails to editors at various publications with a pitch that says, hello, I'm so-and-so. Here's my experience. Here's the story that I've started working on. Is this something you would like to publish? I'm planning on writing 1,500 words or what have you. And the amount of time that it takes for an editor to get back to you can be anywhere from 6 hours to 6 months to never. And that's the nature of a lot of freelance media work, is really not having a sense of any guarantee that your work is going to be accepted. If it is accepted, that's great. Then you usually negotiate a rate, which for freelance journalists who are writing is normally criminally low. We're talking cents to a word, even though it should probably be $1 to $2 or $3 dollars per word. And then you land on a rate and you work on the piece. Now, the rate that's it. That's the money that you get. You could work on a piece of journalistic writing for 2 to 3 weeks, turn it in, and whatever you have negotiated is the rate that you get. So if you negotiated $400 for it, that's all in. It's $400 for 2 weeks worth of work, right? And oftentimes, publications do not pay upon acceptance of a pitch. They pay you once they get the piece and they publish it. So it could be anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to however long it takes to go through the editorial process to however long it takes for them to schedule the piece to see your money if they pay you, right? I was an organizer with the IWW Freelance Journalists Union. We have used the Freelance Isn't Free Act before when folks have not been paid. And it still can take anywhere from 6 months to a year for a publication to respond to pay its people, right? And that's when you're actually pushing the sort of legal buttons to make sure that workers are getting paid in a timely manner. So, for our listeners who aren't aware that that's kind of what the freelance media sort of world looks like, it looks like that across the board. I'm sure TK, as a podcast producer, you have very similar sort of things, right? You're contracted per episode or maybe per season, right?
Yeah.
And you're paid when that episode airs, is my guess, right?
I mean, yeah, it depends, of course. Yeah. I think a lot of people have been a little more, I don't want to say flexible, they've just been playing with the numbers more lately. So like, you'll get maybe per episode, but maybe you get half when half of the thing is done and then the other half when it's over. Or if you have a 6 episodes, they'll be like, okay, we'll pay you a little bit up front, a little in the middle. Like literally they're just making shit up now. Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's whatever,
Well, and the process is a long process, right? We're not just talking about recording something and throwing it up, It's as someone who
research.
prior to working here, I did my own podcast, which I will probably never do again because it's so much work. There's research, there's booking talent, there's doing all that, but there's also editing on the back end if that's something that you do as well, and making sure it sounds good. And thank God for the studio here. Many thanks to the silent studio partner who's listening to this, because I am not good at it. And it's good work. You know what I mean? It's work that should be paid, and it should be paid in a timely manner. And, I'm sure, as Eric, as you know, the National Writers Union has probably got its own little whisper network of which outlets are good to work for and which aren't. And freelancers stay aware of that. And you're not going to get good work if you're not going to pay your workers, right? And just because they're freelance workers doesn't mean that you should take advantage of their flexibility. Am I right?
Yeah. And I think that whisper network, and, when myself and Eric, and we were all on a panel not too long ago, and one of the panelists said, like, the whisper network goes both ways, right? So as much as we are trying to keep folks informed, there are folks, and there's always been folks talking about, like, are they difficult to work with? Does she play well with others? And that is, I think, what has been keeping this epidemic of non-payment of alive. And this shit is more catching than COVID. This is the epidemic of non-payment, y'all. Like, the fact that someone is out there, they're like, you know what? I'm afraid all the time, like that, even talking on this podcast or panels or whatever, like somebody's going to be like, TK, you don't want to F with her because, she's going to like talk about you or report you or whatever. And I'm like, you didn't pay, like you did the bad behavior. You are the not good guy. And a lot of folks like myself, people that work freelance or anyone with a job that is in the power structure of being the like employee, we are scared to death of saying something because we might not work again. Right.
Right.
And how we're perceived in the industry. So yeah, at this point, here I am.
Well, I mean, and that's the cool thing about legislation like Freelance Isn't Free, is that it takes this sort of space where you're worried that you're going to be branded difficult for sending too many emails about non-payment of invoices, right? To the tune of tens of thousands of dollars sometimes per person. We're not just talking about, for me, we're not just, in my work, $400 in comparison is something that I can sometimes work around. But when you're working on long-term projects or you have a long piece or multiple pieces that you've contracted to publish with a certain place and they haven't paid you for 6 months to a year, those invoices stack up, right? And it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and it's a person's livelihood, right? And maybe, Eric, you can kind of speak more to kind of the finer points of what this legislation can do to kind of protect workers from being labeled that, because it takes that sort of bit of like, the toolbox gets passed to the hands of a city council, for example, you can then point to a law that says, it's not me saying this, it's the law saying this, right? And also just really kind of protecting workers from really kind of souring those relationships, because you can begin to pull in other professionals to help you navigate what can be a thorny conversation about money, right?
Yeah, I think that the law does a lot to sort of reduce that like type of friction. There definitely are cases where people are just sort of really intent on exploiting people, and I think that in that kind of case, like there's sort of nothing that you could do to stop people from shit talking, because they just are sort of bad actors. But for the vast majority of people in the situation, where I would say like not that the employer necessarily is like well intentioned, but that where they have sort of convinced themselves that they are justified in like delaying your payment, the law really goes a long way in a lot of different ways. And part of that is, like you were saying, having people who are sort of whose job it is to handle that, whether that in New York City, which was the sort of the first of these laws, that goes through the city's Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. And there are people whose job it is to sort of like help freelancers navigate those situations. And then in New York State and Illinois, which both passed state laws that go into effect like later this spring, that's like both in the Attorney General's office. And I think that in addition to having people who can sort of help take that heat, one of the really important things that the law does is it gives those agencies the ability to bring together groups of people who are dealing with the same type of non-payment. Like you were sort of describing the situation of being a freelancer where you're like pitching something to an editor and then they give you the rate, and you sort of just do the work. And that is really, I think, one of the more common structures of a freelance work relationship, where you really only have one contact at the place that's paying you. You don't know the people that are your coworkers. You don't know what their working conditions are. You don't have a shop floor, so you can't talk about them really. And so, you could be in the situation where you're thinking, oh, like I just am getting screwed on this. And you have no idea that there are 50, 100 other people that are in the same boat. And obviously the employer wants to keep it that way. But one of the things that the law does and that these agencies are able to do is help to sort of like put together these groups. So last year, New York City settled its sort of biggest Freelance Isn't Free case since that original law was passed back in or went into effect back in 2017, which is for this French publisher called L'Officiel. And NWU helped sort of like put that group together. And it's like more than I think 40 freelancers are getting paid like $275,000, something like that. Um, and that is like more than double the amount that all of those people were collectively owed. Some of them hadn't been paid for years. And it just is a level of victory and a level of people sort of being made whole that you wouldn't get if people are sort of remained isolated the way that, I think that the employer in a lot of these cases would like them to be.
Right.
And I think isolation is like the name of the game, even at a place where they find ways, like, where there is a shop floor or a Slack community where you like, I work with you, but we're still remote. But like, we can go on WhatsApp or Signal and talk because, I can DM you. But the isolation is so crazy because like after, I spoke about it the first time, I found out that yet another one of my coworkers from the same place had been, in a non-payment or found themselves in a non-payment issue with the same people. And I'm just like, I wouldn't have known, right? Unless I said something. So not, isolation is the name of the game, whether it's via email or just talking like lots of language that just makes it sound like it's just, you're the only person or whatever, like, and then you start talking and it's way more than one person. And then I think, to the original point of, it's freelance, like, does it absolve you from like doing all the emails? I absolutely not. Like, I think it helps you to have your things in a place that's official because it also takes you a while to hear back from the city, the state, or whoever. It's like, hey, you're on the record. When your teacher used to say, like, I'm making a mark in your notebook, it's the like notebook for the jobs, but you still have to be persistent and you still have to find other ways because you're in queue at that point,
Right. Yeah. I think that's a good point to bring up, particularly in the context of like a wider sort of labor struggle. We've seen, and I cover a lot of this here at the Real News. We've seen a lot of workers who have fought for better wages across industries. And because of the nature of freelance work, the nature of how independent contractors are sort of classified within the broader sort of labor law in this country, you just saw with Prop 22 in California, app-based drivers who were, fighting for health insurance from Uber because they felt they were classified as employees. And Prop 22 essentially classified them as independent contractors using a service so that Uber didn't have to pay them, essentially, right? So you see these companies that are trying to, and in some places succeeding to, really kind of devalue the nature of labor rights and law in this country as if, they haven't been doing this for decades. But it's really heartening to see, especially in a mostly unorganized space like freelance, quote, creative or white collar work, which is the primary focus of kind of our conversation today, seeing that sort of movement towards better protections for the workers who aren't possible. It's not possible to be represented necessarily by a shop floor union because you're not an employee of that particular shop, right? A full-time employee, right? Classified as, right? And so it's good to see this. And it's good to see that it's, from my time in the IWWFJU, seeing how it works in New York City, to seeing it expand to New York State, to Illinois. I think maybe Eric or both of you, if you kind of want to give me some thoughts about what's the process here? How are we expanding these to other states? Is there a sort of blueprint that other interested individuals want to follow in their own states, in their own cities? Is there a specific way that we can kind of turn this into a bit of an organizing handbook for any of our listeners who want to see that replicated where they live?
Yeah, so I think that definitely is like a huge part of why we are doing this. Like, the NWU and the Freelance Solidarity Project, the like digital media division at NWU, led or helped lead the coalitions to get these laws passed in New York State, in Illinois, in Columbus, Ohio, in the city council in Los Angeles. Right now, we have active campaigns in New Hampshire and in the California state legislature. So there really is this sort of effort to build a lot of that capacity and to make these protections sort of normal and at, as much of the country as possible. And in terms of having like an organizing template, I really would urge people to, sort of get involved in NWU and in the legislative work more specifically, like almost, it's like almost entirely member led. And I think that to the extent that there are sort of like replicable steps, like a lot of that just comes from talking to other people who have been through that process. And like, I think that in a lot of ways, it's like, whatever the sort of cliche that's like all unhappy families are unhappy in the same way, but for local and state legislatures, that so much of that work is like going where you are to learn more about what type of weirdos are ostensibly representing you, and is there somebody who is either willing to be an ally or champion for freelancers, or someone that you can at least sort of like hold your nose and work with, and then sort of applying both these like broader organizing principles and learning more about that specific context. And I think that like balancing those things is in a lot of ways is like also what is happening, what it is like to be a freelancer in general, and that you have the sort of like the industry that is like the same and treats people shittily like the same way all over. But at any given company or any different section of the industry, it really is helpful to have people who know more specifically kind of what's up. And I think that one of the really powerful things that we're doing is trying to sort of bring those things together on in each of the campaigns.
I think it's, for many of our listeners, particularly, I would say probably our younger listeners. Have you ever called a representative's office and just said, hey, I got a crazy idea for you? Oftentimes, phone calls like that can happen. When I was living in Omaha, Nebraska, I mean, it was a very similar thing where sometimes you can send a DM to your representative on Twitter. You know what I mean? And just say, have you thought of something like this before? This is something that's happening to me. I voted for you last year, or I live in your district, right? And being able to kind of open up that conversation and figure out a way to begin to build a coalition around legislation like this, because Eric, go. Yeah.
Even if you, I think, correctly are like pretty cynical about that, I think that one of the most important things to remember is that in almost every case, the people that you are talking to like desperately would like to be in front of a local news camera. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that you write, it's like you both are like, we are doing this thing that is meaningful and that like will be helpful for constituents and that your constituents want, and that is an opportunity for you to like talk about this good thing that you're doing for people. Like it's not just a thing that we're asking you to do, out of the sort of goodness of your heart. It's like a thing that, is a sort of set of strategic decisions that like you are making as the organizers and that they are making as the politicians. And I think that in a lot of cases, like those incentives align at least, sort of enough to get this kind of thing done.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic conversation. We're getting down to the last couple of minutes here of our interview, but I wanted to kick it to you, TK, and just get maybe your final thoughts. Is there something that we haven't really touched on in terms of organizing this sort of coalition building that you think is important for our listeners to know?
Yeah. I think that it's just, like we're talking about conventional, like, like organizing the law and stuff like that. But I think it starts even earlier. Like when a company is not paying you, don't keep doing the work. I think I even fell into that trap, right? Like I was like, well, I guess it's coming. Like my first red flag was the first payment was late. like that was like, and I was like, well, because we had a relationship. I actually used to work full time for them. Then I got laid off and then I was contracted. So I'm like, they're not going to that's not going to be me. Nope, it was me. And then after that first batch of invoices was 4 months late, then they just stopped paying at all until January of this year, 2024. So like, stop doing the work and excuse yourself from the situation. These, employers, jobs, places you work are not your family, and even your family. Some of us will a lot of people will ice their own moms out before their employers. Listen, ice everyone. Everyone's dead to me now. But really the other thing would be if you have the privilege of the bandwidth to refuse or to do certain things, if you are blessed to have an abundance of jobs, do not allow the late guy to just slide, because I think that's another thing that a lot of folks do. And a lot of folks, they're just like, that's not my fight. And I'm like, it is your fight, because now you leave it up to a person like me that doesn't have the privilege of bandwidth to come and be on a podcast, to do a panel, but you quiet on the side, didn't get paid, and you've moved on. And I'm like, how do you move on from losing thousands of dollars? That's crazy. Like, the least you could do on the time that you already got a new job. I don't have shit. You need to speak up. I don't need to be the one all the time speaking up. So if someone's listening to this and you're like, well, I don't know if it's worth it to chase them. You still worked. Chase them. Say something. Like, that is my top number one pet peeve. Mm-hmm. It's not even a pet peeve. It's a peeve.
Right. I mean, and it's a good lesson, I think, is really just to say, if you're getting fucked over, say something, because it's the same reason why bosses in quote unquote regular shops don't want you talking about your wages, because they don't want you to say anything, right? Because if you do, then other people are going to go, well, hey, that's actually kind of fucked up. That's not good. Hold on. We should do something about that, right? And they can no longer act with impunity, which is a big lesson of any podcast that I do on labor, is that if you talk to your fellow workers, you can get some shit done. And in this case, you can make laws happen. So thank you so much, both of you, for coming on. I wish we could have a longer conversation, but you'll have to come back on whenever you do have the bandwidth, TK. We can just talk about freelancing in general, or work in general. And Eric, thank you so much for coming on. And I really am excited to see what the NWU is going to be doing in the future. I live in Los Angeles, so seeing the city council pass that Freelance Isn't Free ordinance, chef's kiss. I didn't even realize they were doing it. I was very excited to see that happen. So again, thanks so much for coming on, guys. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
That's it for us here at the Real News Network podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Mel Buer. If you loved today's episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified when the next one drops. You can find us on most platforms, including Spotify and YouTube. And if you're coming to us via YouTube, feel free to leave us a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can find me on most social media. My DMs are always open. Or send me a message via email at mel@therealnews.com. Send your tips, comments, questions, episode ideas, gripes. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work, so please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.